the Now That We're a Family podcast.
Honestly, Katie, my heart's kind of racing right now. I feel like this is a bit of an adrenaline rush.
Yeah? Is it why my heart's racing?
What? Wait, what did you say?
Are we like agreeing why we like feel like more full of adrenaline this podcast than usual?
Are we agreeing?
Okay, why is your heart racing?
Well, because we have 5 kids like on the other side of this wall that are all theoretically taking naps right now.
Or having quiet times.
Yeah.
And I know one of the questions that showed up in this Q&A, or that we get a lot actually, and we weren't going to answer it, but it kind of goes with this whole thing, was what is your childcare situation and is it working for you currently? And we've always, like for the last 5 years, we've had a date night babysitter. That's been our childcare is our date night babysitter. And we really looked forward to that each week. And we eventually stacked our podcast and YouTube filming on that date night.
Yes.
And so we'd either do like just a straight up date or a work date and then get food afterwards kind of thing. But currently that is not working for us because our babysitter is at a college right now.
Yeah, she went to Bible school, which you can't hate too much.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Like, what are you going to say?
It has been tough. She was so dependable for so long.
Yeah.
And I don't think I was I know I wasn't really prepared to lose her. And it has affected a bunch of weekly routines. Like you said, our date night, our content creation. Fortunately, I think we have found, a great alternative.
Yeah, her older sister.
Yeah, AKA her sister. And we're grateful for that. But even with that, we're trying to get back to a rhythm and a routine that is consistent because, boy, I tell you what, the consistency of having that 3 hours every week that we could depend on at the same time was so helpful. And yeah, I am glad actually that you brought that up, Katie. That wasn't one of the questions that we had on the list. Because that's been asked a lot actually over the last maybe 2 or 3 months. And I want to take this opportunity. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You ready? I'm going to take this opportunity to praise you for your ability to do everything that you do with literally, over the last few weeks, no outside help with childcare, but then even prior to the last few weeks, at the most 3 hours a week, and we would do date night oftentimes and then get the filming done in that time frame. And that's really impressive that you're able to do everything that you do, obviously in the home management side of things, which is amazing. But then also the fact that you are able to create so much content. You come and your thoughts are so clear when it is time to record. You make the most of the time to record. And so that is truly inspiring. And it's not and we are not opposed to outside help at all. When it comes to childcare, like I said, we've been really grateful for the consistent support that we've had, but we're in a season right now where we don't have family in town, or like parents or grandparents or things like that. And we don't have a consistent babysitter. So it really makes me grateful for how on the ball you are with everything and how you maximize your time.
Well, thanks for saying that, Elisha.
No, thank you.
That means a lot to me. And obviously, I feel like that happens because we're such a team. And I feel so supported by you. And you're so in tune to me and my ups and downs and what I need. And I'm just grateful for that.
Good.
You're a huge help.
Good.
Okay, so
with that said, should we start the official
Q&A?
Let's
start the official Q&A. You wrote down some questions. I wrote down some questions. We wrote them all down on the same scratch piece of paper here, along with 5 times 1 is 5, 5 times 2 is 10. Someone's scratch paperwork.
Nice.
So, should I just ask them to you? You want to ask them to
Why
me?
don't you? Well, let's go back and forth.
Okay. So, how should I just go in order?
Go in whichever order you want to go. How about that?
This is so stressful all of a sudden. Okay. How do you encourage gentleness with a baby? We got this multiple times. Some people are asking specifically with boys, how do you encourage gentleness with boys and a baby? But how do you do that?
Well, one, I think that when you have young children, while the older kids are still young, they really get to grow with the kiddo. Mm-hmm. And so it's very natural from the get. Like when you're when I think of having our second, Leon was just 13 months. And so he grew up with his younger sister. And similarly with Lucy, she was 15 months old when we had our third, and it's been pretty similar for all of our kids. And so the next kid is young, and you really are teaching them everything at that point. And so teaching them to be gentle, to not touch the face, to not poke their eyes out, to not bounce them violently in their bouncer like they want to. And what's interesting is now that I think about it, is that this has been the most challenging, I think, as far as our toddler being gentle with the newborn, because this is the oldest our second youngest has ever been, right? When having a child, he's 2.5, and then we've got a newborn. Oops.
Whoop, forgot to silence the phone.
Yeah, we're back.
That ended up being a longer conversation and less exciting than we thought.
Yeah, wow. I'm assuming Luke's going to take the phone conversation out of the podcast. What were we talking about? We were just talking about our 2-year-old being gentle with our newborn.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this?
So I do think having, especially with boys or just in general, just teaching gentleness in general goes a long way. It can be very specific with the baby. Obviously, it has eyes and a mouth, and you can't put food in its mouth and stuff like that. But we use all glass dishes here. They use glass cups. Just learning to be gentle in a gentle world, that can go a long ways, because they already know how to be gentle, so they have context for that. So when you're saying be gentle with the baby, they're like, what? I'm used to just whacking everything around whenever I want. They have this context for being gentle, I guess. So I think that can help.
Yeah, and I think we do. In that, you're teaching them where they can be rough, where they should, where it's expected that they're gentle, and so that they're clear on those categories. We don't want just soft boys, but we also don't want just rambunctious rowdy boys. We want them to be capable of both. And so I think we make it clear, hey, you can be rough and you can wrestle outside and you can climb the trees and jump out and you can dig holes, but then indoors you're not able to do that. You've got to have your inside behavior, and that translates over to how you're handling young babies as well.
Yeah, definitely. So anyways, homeschool versus private school, Elisha. I should have asked you that one, but I just wanted to go in order.
Okay, homeschool versus private school. For us personally, we're homeschooling, and that's the plan for the duration. I think the conversation was really, public school was not an option because of the secular, really, pagan nature of the public school system. And as Christians, I think it's incumbent upon us to give our children a Christian education. We need to instill a Christian worldview into them, and that's going to be through the sciences, through math, through English, literature. All those things that we're going to be teaching them in school needs to be in the context of being a Christian, and the public school does not do that. And so, obviously, when you're homeschooling, you're able to do that. And then there are many great private Christian schools as well that do that. I think our thoughts, and you'll be able to speak more to this. A lot of the reason we were kind of close to the idea of private Christian school was because, one, you have a heart for teaching, you were pumped to teach our kids. And then 2, we're kind of selfish with our kids' time. It's we like being around our kids. We want them to be present and to be in our home. And then 3, we didn't want our family schedule to be dependent on an outside, a third party's schedule and structure. Those are my motivations anyways. You probably have more. What are your thoughts?
No, those are really big ones. I think that one I would add is just the peers of your kids.
Yes.
And so that's something that's really, we've talked about this over and over and over and over, but I think it comes up a lot in the school conversation, because there are schools, I think anytime you get insecure as a homeschool mom, you kind of look for other options. And so I've definitely done that and start being maybe if we put Leon in a classical Christian academy, he could get more more devoted time to his age grade, all day would just be a focus on his grade, and he'd have specialized teachers, and they're Christians and they love the Lord and all that. But then I always come back to, anytime we've had this conversation, but we can't choose who his peers are. We can't choose who his friends are and what's going on in their homes and what they're choosing to talk about, even at this age. You say they don't have phones at this age. A lot of them do. But what are they choosing to talk about? What have they been exposed to? And what do they think is cool, in air quotes? Because that, again, rubs off on our son. And what's funny is on a lot of our screen-free videos or things of that nature, people say, well, it's just because, they aren't around other kids and that have differing opinions on that kind of stuff.
What do you mean?
As in, like, they're cool. Our children, the Vogtbergs, might be fine not watching movies, but that's because they're not around all these peers that are,
sure, talking about
these things all the time. And I actually do think there's some truth in that. Like, our friend groups and the kids that our kids are around are very like-minded in a lot of ways. And we definitely get things like, our oldest just came up to us and was like, what's Star Wars? Everyone's seen Star Wars. All my friends have seen Star Wars. When do I get to see Star Wars? So they are just influenced just by what other children talk about too, and what they think is awesome. So we want to, as much as possible, facilitate that being things that we value as a family.
Yes.
For as long as possible.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's a huge that might be, I mentioned those three things, but the peer influence might be the biggest reason we want to be able to homeschool our kiddos. And it's not because there's amazing Christian teachers at private Christian schools. It's because you cannot control who the other kids are. And there's awesome families that send their kids to private schools, but I just think of Leon being around whatever, however many kids are in a class, 25 kids that are the same age as him, and that stresses me out. Like, if he's with them 5 days a week, the variety on which those kids are going to be exposed to different concepts and ideas and the media they're going to be.
Even just behaviors. Like, little boys have just like weird behaviors.
Oh, yes.
And we see it in our own boys. It's
Absolutely.
like, why are you making those noises? Or why are you acting that way? It's just kind of weird. And I get they're trying to figure stuff out, but we don't necessarily want to be like, here, go around, 20 other boys that are all going through their odd little boyness and pick up on all their strange traits. So it's not to say that we don't have our kids around other kids, because they're very, very social.
Yeah.
And but it's usually in the context of our home or when we're there, and we can just kind of have a pulse on what's going on. So. Hey, you guys, I just wanted to tell you real quick about my homeschooling course, Homeschooling the First 3 Years. It's all about laying a foundation of joy and confidence and fun and simplified homeschool in your home. So if you're in a place where maybe you're considering homeschooling your kiddos in the next few years, then this course is for you. It's going to break down not only what we do for homeschool and our family and what we've done for the first 3 years in homeschool, but it's also going to show you exactly how that looks. So I'm going to take a camera around with me vlog style and show you, how does it look to homeschool with a baby? How does it look to homeschool with a toddler? How does it look to homeschool multiple grades at one time? How do you navigate different learning tendencies? How do you navigate your learning style as a teacher? And how do you motivate children and get them to love learning? I love homeschooling my kids. One of my favorite things that I get to do with them each day, and it's something that I want you to love doing with your children as well. So if you look down in the description box, you will be able to find a discount code where you can get a discount off of Homeschool the First 3 Years, and I really hope that it blesses your home.
That's good. Well, actually, on that point, this was a question I was going to ask, and I'll ask it now because it kind of is a nice little add-on to that. The question is, what does community look like for you in this season of parenting young children? And so we can talk real time. I mean, Sunday being kind of obviously a paramount day of the week for us, fellowshipping with other Christians, and the kids have a bunch of friends at our church, and of course we're there worshiping, and we're there hearing God's word and partaking in the various elements of the Sunday service. But then there's always a solid chunk after church where the kids are all playing outside together, and they've got real relationships with most of those kids with a lot of those kids, because we're a part of a Tuesday night small group where, once again, our kids are hanging out with another, a group of kids that we're friends with for 3 hours every Tuesday night.
It's pretty fun. We all do dinner together, which is wonderful. And I love fellowship around a meal. I think that's a really special thing that's very rare. So
yes. Yeah. And then you can jump in here whenever too. I'm just kind of thinking through our week, So it's like, Sunday they're with friends at church. Tuesday night they're with friends. Thursday, me and the boys go to father-son ministry, and we've been doing that for about 2 years now, and they've been able to form some fun friendships there. And I really am grateful my boys are able to be around a lot of those boys. There's just some
Yeah.
great boys that are a couple years older than our sons.
They're very sober-minded, but still fun-loving.
Yes.
It's like an amazing combination.
Yes. So that's good. And then oftentimes on Saturday, we will socialize with other families just for random occasions. And then I think of our friend group here in the area.
Wednesday nights are usually like a hospitality night. So we either go over to someone else's home or have people over to our home.
Yeah. And I even think of just this last, Wednesday, was that 2 nights ago? With the Woodfords coming over, that was so good for our boys. I mean,
oh yeah, they have sweet boys.
Their sons are, a couple years. Well, I guess their oldest is a couple years older than Leon, but then they've got a son Leon's age, and then they have 6 kids, and that was great for our boys to be around other. Like you said, I love finding boys and families where they're sober minded, but they are fun loving and adventurous and capable, and so yeah, I feel very blessed. And you can probably keep adding on in community because I know you get together with people periodically as well when I'm not around. So what is that? What would you say?
Yeah, I'd say like every once in a while I do come over to my house or I go over to your house and we do a play date and hang out. Those are rare, but I really enjoy them with my friends. And yeah, I mean, we also just like go to the parks around here. And I will say that's where we get like more straight up, just like the neighborhood kids situation, which we really try to limit as of this year. Just as the kids get older and just exposed to so much stuff, it's just like, you're 8. How are you talking about this? I don't know.
Yeah. And I've been pretty grateful with how a lot of these heavier subjects have come up in at the park and the things that our kids will come and ask us.
We've talked about like a ton of heavy topics with our kids because they've all come up at the park.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that we're in a spot with our kids where they come to us. I mean, usually we get to hear the dialogue because the parks that we go to are pretty enclosed where we're pretty close by to all the conversations, but of course you're not going to be there for everything with your kids, nor should you plan on being there for everything. And so I'm grateful that our kids have brought so many things to our attention, and it makes me wonder of the things that they still haven't brought up, that they're chewing on, because a lot of the things they'll bring up a month later.
Yeah.
Leon will be like, so Daddy, what does fill in the blank mean? Or what's this?
Or
like,
so-and-so said he did this to someone else. Or
yeah, exactly.
He's
just been thinking about it for weeks.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know about this. And then he brings it up and you're like, wow. And I'm so grateful that we have that dialogue with our kiddos. And hopefully, I don't react too dramatically, just kind of like, what?
No, you don't.
He said what? No.
It's usually like, we're just like, okay, limiting time with said child.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, goodness. How do you transition children out of naps? I'm going to go ahead and answer this one because I feel like we actually have a great flow on this, especially this was specific with babies. And then, I'll just tell you what I do. So when children are taking 2 naps a day, that's great. 1 in the morning, all the kids have a quiet time in the afternoon from 1 to 3. That's what's going on right now. So the baby's napping, the toddler's napping. I have one child that's 4 that is hit or miss right now, but he still lays in his bed for 2 hours. And then the 2 big kids that are 5 and 6 do quiet time on their own, which is just playing with Lego or reading. And sometimes I use this time to call one of them in to do something one-on-one with me. So that's kind of what that looks like currently. When a baby drops their morning nap or starts to drop it, those transitions are always awkward. I feel you on that, because it's like they're still cranky if they don't have the morning nap. But then if they have the morning nap, they might not sleep in the afternoon, or they might just sit in their bed and fuss or something like that. So what's worked really well with our last 2 kids is my kids do not drop the morning nap. I put them in their crib with toys and a bottle for about a year after they start kind of intermittently napping. And so it's a quiet time for them. And if they need the nap, they'll fall asleep. And if they don't need the nap, then they just sit there with their bottle and their toys for about 30 to 40 minutes. And then I get them up. And so we've kept that going with Lawrence until he just dropped that when Lionel was born. So at around 2 years old, he dropped that morning quiet time. But he had it probably ever since he was 16 or 17 months and dropped his morning nap, or was kind of intermittent on that. We just kept the quiet time going in the morning. And that's amazing when you're homeschooling, because it keeps your house quiet with that age child, which is kind of hard to entertain while you're trying to focus on other subjects. So anyways.
Yeah, and that's what we're experiencing right now. Is our kids are in the other room and they've just become accustomed to this 2-hour quiet time because it really never stopped from the time that they were napping.
Yeah, so we always keep that one. We might drop the morning quiet time, but we never drop the afternoon. And I say never because I was, 20 years old and still living at home, and when we still had a 2-hour quiet time in my home. So anytime I hear of moms being like, oh, my 4 and 5-year-old decided they didn't want to nap, it's like, how do you do that? Like, I just say, too bad, stay in your room for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll add a story tape, or you can look at books or something like that.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that's good. All right, I've got a question.
Okay.
Are y'all KJV only?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know how, I'm curious what you would say. I would say from my perspective, I'm not, like, we aren't KJV only in terms of that's the only Bible we've read. Like, I've read the CSB or CSV. I don't know. I don't even know what the other translations are that I have. The ESV, definitely. And so we have other translations of the Bible in our home. As far as what I actually view as like the Word of God, it's definitely my King James Version Bible, just because I grew up with that version. And so if it's not like thee, thou, thus, and thy, it's really hard for me to believe it's Scripture. And that's just like, that's preference. I don't think that there's not other great translations out there. So I'm not King James only in that extent, but all the scripture I've memorized is KJV. Elisha has memorized a lot of King James scripture as well. And that's what we're raising our kids on when it comes to memorization is King James. And I think that it's nice when a family picks a translation and has that within their family. Because then when you like quote scripture and stuff like that, you aren't all jumbling over each other and you aren't saying the same words, so I don't know. What would you say? Yeah,
it's been a while since I think either of us have done a deep dive into the translations.
Yeah.
But I know currently it's pretty funny because I'm with you. King James is a straight up preference. It's not a conviction. If anything, because of who we've been listening to the last 4 or 5 years, they are predominantly not KJV people.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot more heavily ESV, and we have a lot of ESV Bibles in our house, and our church is ESV.
They've been using like an L
LSB,
something.
I think. Yeah, they're transitioning over to ESV because it's been kind of split. And so we're around a lot of ESV. Like I said, we have many ESV Bibles, but just from straight up preference, I'm with you. There's something so beautiful about the Old English, and it's just nice. It's nice prose,
Yeah,
King James.
yeah. It's beautiful to read. I feel like it treats the heaviness of the Bible very tactfully because it's very gracious. It's funny when I read more modern translations. I'm like, they said what? There's no way I'm reading that to my child. But I love that as children's vocabulary grows, they're ready to understand the fuller depth of what something's talking about by the time they can understand. And you're going to have incredible reading comprehension if you can read the King James Version. Reading an old classic book is a walk in the park. So that's like another sideline benefit. I think it just increases vocabulary, and it's just beautiful. It's beautiful work.
I agree.
Okay. You brought this one up. We were kind of laughing about it earlier. The Enneagram. It's been forever since I feel like the Enneagram has come around in conversations. There's probably still some fringe, I don't know, conversations going on about it, but it's not the hot thing online like it was a few years ago. And people are asking what our thoughts were on the Enneagram. What are your thoughts, Elisha?
It's funny. I feel like this is one of those topics that I feel like we've got a few things like this in our life where, I did the Enneagram. What do you call it? Test? It's because it's not a personality test. Technically, right? What is it? I don't know.
I don't know what it was.
I did the Enneagram, whatever. It's 8 when everybody was doing it, it feels like, right?
Yeah.
Like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And
it was a little bit after we got married. Maybe, so maybe like 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think I was a 4-3 or something, 3-4.
Yeah, you still remember.
4-3.
Okay, I will say this, you guys. Elisha doesn't like personality tests because they put him in a box. So that's a box that I put Elisha in, is the box of he doesn't like personality tests.
That's a classic 3 or 4, I think, isn't it? Isn't that what that is?
Oh my goodness. So I was like a big personality take all the tests person until I learned that Elisha didn't really like them. And then I kind of phased out of using them. I think I was kind of over it. But I got into the Enneagram, thought it was awesome. I was a 3, wing 4 or whatever. And I was like, you have to take this. So Elisha, like probably all the good husbands of the day, took the Enneagram. And out of all the personality or whatever tests we've ever taken, that one you did feel understood by that test.
Yeah, I mean, sure, I guess. Yeah. It was
You think you felt understood because it said that a 4, wing 3 feels misunderstood.
Oh,
He's
there
like,
you go.
I've never felt so understood in my life.
Yeah. I don't know. What I was going to say though about this is that, yeah, we went through the whole thing where we did it and it was fun. And then I want to say like a year later, we didn't care about it anymore.
Yeah.
And then all the controversy started hitting the more all of our circuits. Like everybody.
Yeah, like a lot of people we respected started being like, okay, the Enneagram is demonic, or just like there's spiritual warfare going on with the Enneagram. Stay away from this. It's occultish. And we're like,
Okay.
oh, that totally makes sense. I mean, stuff with, I know with like numerology and stuff like that, when I was in high school, that was a big thing. And I stayed away from that because my mom was like, oh, that's like part of the occult. But then I didn't think of that when it came to the Enneagram. For whatever reason, I think it was just so pitched as a personality test, kind of like a Myers-Briggs or something. You get letters, you get numbers, whatever. I didn't really correlate the two with numerology and astrology and all this stuff. And so, yeah, we did it at the time, but then I had no problem believing when I just saw those thumbnails, I guess, people I respected, being like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. It's probably occultish.
Yeah.
But I didn't even listen. I didn't do the research on it.
I was going to say the same thing. I feel like we didn't do much past looking at the thumbnail or the blog title. And we're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Like, I totally believe that. We'll just not do that anymore, which we are doing it anyways. Like, you know, once
we didn't care by the time.
No, like I didn't have any books in my home about it or whatever. We took some online test and talked about it and then moved on with our lives. So when people ask us for like a opinion on the Enneagram, it's kind of hard to give you one because it's like, I totally would say right now, I wouldn't recommend it based on the people I know that say they wouldn't recommend it.
Right.
But I've
know
not
why,
done
like-
any research on my own. And it seems kind of like a waste of time at this point because I don't care anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm
Like-
not going to study it at this point because I just don't.
There's
care.
other things I'd rather research.
Same.
I'm not going to have our kids doing the Enneagram or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I know this wasn't the question, but Colby, that was a big one for you. Strengths finders. And then you already mentioned Myers-Briggs. And so I feel like we've done a handful since, being into, and those are ones that we probably would still use as reference points.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Colby is how you work. That's an entrepreneurial assessment. So is Strengths Finder. And I mean, those are deeply rooted in my family's culture.
Oh, my word.
It's like scripture and your Colby assessment is like right underneath it.
Yeah. Kate, I mean, I don't know how often this comes up in, at family gatherings on your side of the family.
Every get together, at least
once
probably daily.
Yeah, multiple times it comes up.
Probably
daily. And your family gets. And I love you always look at me because I've learned to go along with it. I'm like, okay, I should get into this. Everybody's into it. But for the first few years of our marriage, it drove me nuts. I'm like, are we seriously talking about this again? And Kate would always look across the room and smile at me. But I think I've matured or something. I don't know.
Oh yeah, you embrace it now.
Yeah.
As good as you can. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this one. Okay, so I brought this up.
You're going to talk about it, huh?
It was no intimacy in 6 weeks postpartum. How does a husband handle it? And this was asked, I think we briefly touched on this in our last Q&A, I want to say, because it's been asked on multiple Q&As. So I don't know if this person's not getting their questions answered adequately or if we didn't touch on it and I just thought we did.
Okay.
So if this is redundant, sorry, you guys. But Elisha said, just mention very vague terms. But I think no intimacy in 6 weeks postpartum. How does a husband handle it? Or how does a wife handle it? Honestly, that's like while you're healing, there are other ways to be romantically involved. And I would just say that I would highly encourage you to not have your marriage be void of intimacy, physical intimacy of any form for 6 weeks. That's a really important part of a marriage, and that can happen while you're still healing. So that's all I would encourage. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think just from a man's perspective, there is I don't know if it's just God's grace, whatever it is, where you, especially in the postpartum season, I really do think, man, I know I have the ability to like put on pause that part of their brain for maybe not 6 weeks like what you're talking about, and maybe that's not ideal, but it's not like, oh, it's been 2 weeks, everything's a temptation, everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way, and obviously there's never an excuse for falling into sin, but even feeling extra temptation, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I do think there are just seasons where you're kind of like, okay, like going into it, this isn't going to be the frequency that you've become accustomed to in your marriage, and you live with it, and then really I feel like anything then is kind of a fun bonus. Yeah. I'm just laughing because I don't. Yeah. Okay.
And I don't think I wasn't addressing this either from a sin point, like, oh, I'm scared Elisha's gonna fall into sin or something. It's more just like I feel like it's healthy for the marriage. Like it's still bonding, it's still enjoyable.
No doubt.
And there is something, it's still a special form of connection that you have with your spouse.
Yes.
Even in that time of, being really just the primary concern is mommy and baby and that bond. I think that it's still really bonding to have something with your husband.
Absolutely. And I know that was specifically talking about the postpartum season, but in any busy season of life, it is bizarre how it's like, man, what's going on in our marriage? We're feeling this friction, we're feeling this tension. And so much of that can be resolved. I'm not saying everything is resolved when you have sex, but it's like, oh, it is a bond. There is something that's very spiritual and bonding that happens when you partake in that. It's like the sacrament of marriage, that's exclusive to marriage. And so when you're not partaking in that on a regular basis, it's easy to feel disjointed in your marriage. And so,
and it can be a really beautiful time because you aren't doing what you would usually do. And so it can actually mix things up. So anyways, I would say that. Okay. How do your parents parent children still at home differently than you?
Wow. Isn't that yes is the answer.
I know. I like how it was assumed that the younger half is parented differently than the older half. So Elisha and I are both in the older half. I would say just as the oldest, I got parented differently, which totally makes sense because I feel like we're totally doing that with our oldest, and that's just run in the mill for your oldest kid. You get some things that are awesome about that role and some things where you're like, oh man, you were the guinea pig, and that's just life. And I don't regret that at all. I loved my place in the family, and I hope that our oldest son and daughter do as well.
Oh yeah.
But Elisha was fourth born, and
fourth out of 10. So like you said, it was kind of getting to that middle stage, but I was considered one of the older kids my whole life, that older section. Boy, I'm sure there's some commonalities in any big family. But for us, I know that life was just smaller for the older half, or really the older half. And it was probably similar for you because you're dealing, like right now, our oldest is 6. And so we're dealing with 6-year-old problems. That's the biggest the problems are getting right now is 6-year-old problems.
Yeah, very small.
And so that sets a lot of the tone for the overall house. When he's 14, the nature of our home is obviously going to be different because we're dealing with 14-year-old issues, and those are the nature of the conversations, and that's going to have an effect on what our younger kids are exposed to and what they're witnessing on a regular basis. And so therefore I think that's going to inform how you parent those younger children, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. I think it's just, it's natural that the younger half are more worldly wise than the older half.
Yes.
When you're in a home where the parents are very conscientious about the environment of the home and what's being let into the home, by nature of older children, there's just more grown up stuff and older stuff. And I think that the Lord is gracious in that. That's just the way it is. You can't change it. And so, I would say everything with my younger siblings on a surface level is probably different, but the core remains the same as far as my parents' value system and the faith that they're passing on to my, younger siblings, and the obedience and respect that they demand and that my siblings love to give them, because they're just so worthy of respect. I think that there are so many things on that core level that are the same. But in terms of did all my younger sisters match in matching dresses till they were 14 like I did. No, they don't. They developed a personal style a lot earlier. And that's just like, it's like apples or oranges, it's just different.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not to say one's better or worse.
Media, like the media that my older brother was, allowed to or watch or exposed to when he was 12, 13, and 14 versus my youngest brother when he was 12, 13, and 14 is dramatically different. Same with music. And like you said, it makes sense because when your oldest is 12, you're like, okay, you get to tell them everybody's dressing this way and therefore all the kids are dressing that way or you're all holding the standard. But then when your oldest is 18, you're like, okay, well, we're not going to tell our 18-year-old, how they're going to dress and it's going to be congruent with the rest of the family. So all of a sudden that uniformity starts going away. And so then your 12-year-old has a lot more liberty in what they choose to wear.
Yeah, like Lionel will probably know what Star Wars is when he's 6 years old, because I'm sure we'll have seen it as a family at that point.
Yeah.
And, it won't be the same as where Leon was when he was 6. So I think there's pros and cons to being in both halves of the family. I think you could be just as intentional as a parent. And that's something I really respect with both of our parents is they are just as intentional with the younger half, even though it looks a little different.
Yes.
And I think we've spoken about this before. I think the middle kids, like in that stage where the middle kids were growing up, there was like this maybe slack of the reins a little bit more.
Yes.
And then both sets of our parents were like, whoa, we can't relax here. We've got a lot of little kids still coming up behind. We have to tighten the reins and parent very intentionally. And they have both really finished the race well, I feel like, and are still in that process.
That's a good point, Katie. And I want to be aware of that as a parent because I do think it's exactly what you said. My parents went through a season where their older, half or whatever you want to call it, the older batch, were entering into their young adult years. They were thriving in the faith. They were meeting, their future spouse, and they were handling the dating relationships in a really healthy and mature way. My parents were like, this is awesome. And I think there was this temptation to kind of slack off it wasn't a temptation. It was just a propensity based off of the circumstances, I think.
Yeah. You kind of have your eye on the success that's happening because of all the intention that you put in.
Yes.
I feel like it's easy to just relax. Maybe relax is the term.
Yeah. And if you've got a 22-year-old, but you still have a 12-year-old, you're like, wait a second. We were pouring a lot of time and energy into when our 22-year-old was 12, we were very involved in his life in an intentional way.
Yeah, like when I got married at 21, I had a 3-year-old sister.
Yeah, well.
So, I mean, I think she's 13 still. So, like, my mom's still homeschooling and all that. And your mom's about a decade ahead in terms of how old her youngest is, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. And I do admire our parents because I think that, like you said, maybe there was a season, it's always so easy to armchair quarterback, as a kid. And there was a time, especially when you get in a mood as like one of the older kids, you're like, oh, when we were kids,
we weren't allowed.
That never would have been allowed, or we would have never gotten away with that. And it's usually always pretty playful, unless you're in a genuinely bad mood and you just want to be bitter, But there were some times that I think our parents, both sides of the parents, were very receptive to the older kids being like, hey, mom, dad, like, what's going on? Like, I heard my 9-year-old sibling singing this song. Is this the music that's allowed in the house? And I think our parents were really receptive to that. They're kind of like, you know what, you're right. Like that, we do need to rein this in a bit. And so I think that is really cool that they've maintained that spirit of humility throughout the duration of their parenting.
Yeah, I feel like that's very rare in big families, which makes sense because you just kind of like, I think it'd be easy to let stuff go and kind of ride on the success of your older kids if they're thriving and just stop doing what got them there in the first place. I mean, that's just a common side effect of success, right? The biggest danger of success is stopping doing what you've done to get to that place in business and family and everything.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So anyways, I really respect our parents that way. And yes, that was very specific. Like, how did they parent them differently than you? But I would just say yes. And it's still really awesome. I still really admire them. And I do think there is an element too of when you aren't a newbie parent, you're just also, I think both of our parents know what are the bigger issues and what to let go. What's worth fighting over with your child or really putting your foot down with, and what is like not as big of a deal. Because I think you do have that experience too, to be like, okay, well, not everything is a super big deal. Like when I think of myself as a teen and what was considered a big deal compared to how that's just really relaxed with my younger sisters, I think it's better now in some instances, because my parents are just like, oh, okay, that's not a huge issue. But I also really value it is a double-edged sword, because there were some really big benefits that I appreciate my parents being so on to me.
Yes.
During those years, I think there were some benefits, and I reaped some blessings of that too. So yeah, it's hard to walk that line perfectly as a parent. I feel like that's why we really respect. One reason we really respect our parents, because they've done a good job of that.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, this woman asked, she said that she's convicted about Halloween. How does she bring it up when her husband has such good memories? We do have a podcast, we'll link in the description box, about what we do with Halloween and why we came to that conclusion.
Yeah. What would you say? I don't know. This is one of those, again, I don't want to speak too much about it because we did do a full podcast and I forget what we said, honestly. And we haven't talked about it in a long time, but we don't celebrate Halloween. We never have, and it's never been an issue because neither one of us grew up celebrating it. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a literal non-issue in our home. But I'm trying to, compare that to something that maybe we have come into, I think of like even Christmas,
Yeah, because we didn't celebrate Christmas for years because that was my conviction not to. And Elisha was really gracious in that.
Yeah, I grew up celebrating Christmas, having great association with it. And then Katie came in with a conviction. But again, with that, you were really gracious. It's not like you were hard-nosed. You weren't going to ever, sing a Christmas carol. You were going to fold your arms at church when it was the Christmas carol time.
Oh, yeah.
And you were willing to like go to my side of the family's Christmas gatherings and have such a good attitude. It was just like in our home. You didn't want to do that. So yeah, I don't know in this instance what.
Well, specifically the way the question's phrased, I guess, how do I bring it up? I would just say bring it up. That's all I would really encourage, is like, you don't know what your husband's thoughts are necessarily on it. He might have really great memories with celebrating Halloween, but be very sensitive to your concern about it. Or maybe you guys could research it together and you can come up with more reasons for your concern instead of just this gut response to, I don't want to do this. Or maybe you could, I don't know, you'll just reach a closer level of oneness having the conversation, as long as you do it in a really healthy way. If you are a part of my parents' marriage course called Marriage Maximizer, they have a section in there all about the one-way conversation. And I think that is the ideal way to address a sensitive topic that is potentially going to be emotionally charged. And have that conversation end up in a healthy spot, begin and end in a healthy spot. So anyways, I would really encourage that if you feel like there's a lot of hot button topics in your marriage, or if this is just a really big issue, following their steps for that one-way conversation is really big. But just bring it up in a way that's not attacking him or saying he's, of the devil because he celebrates this, like he has his reasons for wanting to do it, and I just have a conversation about it. Yeah. And if he really wants to have the kids dress up and go trick-or-treating or whatever, then I would roll with that personally, and you could keep having conversations about it year after year and praying, and the Lord can change his heart, Yeah,
it is bizarre. I'm trying to think of a recent scenario where this has happened, but I feel like there have been countless times in our marriage where I've been reluctant to bring something up that you were doing something a certain way. I was like, that's not my preference, but I don't really want to bring it up because I thought it was maybe more important to you than it really was. Mm-hmm. But then finally I bring it up. You're kind of like, oh yeah, like, you should have said something. Like that's, I always did it this way just because. And you don't know until you actually have the conversation, and things can become a way bigger deal if you make them a bigger deal, and it might be, again, who knows what the circumstance is.
It's really
and it could
hard
be like, okay, so find some compromise. Like, can we not do the demonic costumes and, the zombie stuff? Like,
or what if we hosted an event at our house?
Yes.
Or
Can we do a harvest party? Yeah. Like maybe it's the terminology. You're kind of like, because there is plenty to be concerned with Halloween. Don't get me wrong. And there's a reason we don't celebrate it. But
changing maybe the way that if he has really good memories around it, well, maybe you go to a church that has an event, or you avoid dressing up a certain way, or, there's ways to work your way towards something that you guys are both more comfortable with. Yeah. And again, hosting is always a great option too. Yeah. But trying to come into, if it is a really big deal, not going like cold turkey, cutting this out of your life as far as this, having a celebration on that day or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm really not a big fan of Halloween, so. Okay, this is a really quick one. What brand of dumb phone do you recommend?
Well, my favorite has still been, it's funny because I don't know, I'm such a tightwad when it comes to replacing my phone. My favorite has been the light phone. I had that for a couple of years. That was, I think, the first non-smartphone I got.
Yeah.
Was the light phone. And I had that, maybe for a year and a half, 2 years. And then it just broke. And I ran to the local, AT&T store and bought a flip phone and haven't replaced that just because I haven't gotten around to it. So I've had it over a year. But once this one breaks, I would really like to get a light phone.
Yeah.
Again.
And what's funny is my dumb phone, I have a regular just like flip phone. And mine's broken 4 times. And Elisha, who actually wants to replace his with a light phone, can't break his for the life of him.
Yes, this thing's in.
But I tell you what, guys, I just like went to Walmart, and here's the thing: everyone asks about what's your brand of flip phone. Like there's a difference, and it's like,
I don't know.
There's not like a flip phone 7 or a flip phone 11.
I mean, there might be. It just says AT&T on the front, and the back is ALCATEL.
Yeah.
Alcatel.
They're called a dumb phone for a reason. If you have one, you have them all. You've experienced them all. So I go to Walmart, I pay $30, and whatever's in the container I get. I don't know the brand. I don't know, like, the features are all the same.
Yeah, no, I would say that's the case with the run-of-the-mill flip phones. The light phone is kind of its own thing.
Yeah.
That is.
Yeah. I wasn't negating what you said before about that.
Yeah.
The light phone. Yeah. There's like the Gab phones and the light phones.
Yeah, I've never used the Gab phone, but people like that one too. So
see, it's not as cool. Like, it's not as much of a flex using the Gab phone because it looks like a smartphone. So it doesn't look like you're living life more intentionally.
Exactly. Like, if you want to do your good deeds before men, then don't get the Gab phone because it looks just like you've got a smartphone.
I know. Preferred ethnicity of food to eat when dining out.
Okay. I mean, probably the most obvious one is just Mexican food. Like, that's just usually what we do as a family.
And then what would you say for a date night?
I don't know, probably some form of Italian.
Yeah. Italians are fancy date if we have like a lot of time. And if we're getting food like after a podcast or something, I would say it's pub food.
Yes.
Like burgers.
Wow. Okay. You thought about this.
No, that's just like my gut.
Yeah. So as a family, I'd say Mexican restaurants. One, obviously you get chips and salsa. And so when you've got hungry kids or a hungry mama, you're able to, wow. I'm just saying, I'm not saying I just think like maybe I was talking about.
Just in theory, guys.
Yeah. You get calories right away. And then usually, depending on Mexican restaurants, it's a bit more affordable, like with a family.
And they love kids.
Yes, I agree.
They're family restaurants for a reason. They expect you to bring your kids there. They expect there to be chips on the floor. They expect you to spill your glass of water.
Yes.
And they are so nice. The servers and everything. It's just not a pretentious environment. And so I really love that.
Yeah, and then like you said, if it's fancy, some Italian restaurant. And then you're right though that ever since we were dating, you and I have both had a bond over pub burgers. Like, we just love pub food. Yeah. And so that still is kind of
French fries and burgers.
Yeah, go to.
Did the older kids struggle with welcoming Lionel? Were you intentional about specific time?
So far, this has been the most jubilant reception of a child for us. And
I think because the kids are older, so they can be more jubilant.
Yes, they get it way more. They were looking for the expectation and the anticipation was far greater with Lionel than any of our kids. And so it's been very celebratory and it's been fun from the first morning when the kids walked into, to our bedroom to meet him. It was so rewarding.
Yeah. Like makes me emotional.
Yes,
like how
see their excitement.
It was just a family push there at the end to I don't know.
I mean,
Not specifically. I did the pushing.
Yeah. Come on now. You got to take the credit
well,
there.
We were just, the family expectation was so high there at the end. I really, really, really believe that kids not accepting another child into the family is a failure. It's like a failed social construct. It's totally something that the culture has pushed, and children will naturally delight in a new sibling if they are not hearing voices that say otherwise. I really believe that when it comes to, I mean, that's been our experience. We've had children that are 2 years old and 1 year old and, 6 all along. We've never had a child at any age begrudge a baby coming into the world. I do think I have a blog post all about this, which we'll also link down below, specific things that we do, because we are really intentional, mainly with the baby that's being kicked out, as far as getting mommy time or a lot of extra daddy time. Right. So that like 1.5 or 2 year old or 3 year old, whoever's your youngest, I feel like we are really intentional with that. Yeah. But everyone's just excited.
And on that topic, every time we've had a new baby, it's like I then get to form a new bond with the next youngest, because I end up spending a lot more time with them. And I feel like I'm doing that right now with Lawrence. I definitely did it with, with Leon when we had Lucy, and then with all of them thus far. And I've been remembering that with how fun it's been with Lawrence. He and I are really connecting right now. And I think it's because he got, he graduated from being Mama's baby. So now I'm hanging out with him, and it's been really fun.
Went from being mommy's baby to daddy's boy.
Yeah. And also, like you said, it is so cool that we get to set the tone and the expectation for our kids receiving their siblings. And that book, Family Teams by Jeremy Pryor. Jeremy Pryor has been on the podcast before. Maybe we can link that below. But I love the way he talks about viewing your family as your team. And I think Katie and I both grew up with parents that instilled that culture and instilled that mindset in us, and it continues to this day. And so more, it just seems better. Like another teammate, somebody else that has a like-minded vision and goal, and we're pulling towards the same thing together. And I feel that as an adult, like every time one of my siblings has success in an area, I'm like, I say things like we or us, or it feels very like we're doing it. Like we're winning here. And even with my in-laws, I feel the same way, when there are wins. It's not to say that there's never been competitive moments growing up, but in general, that's the mindset, and it's cool that we get to instill that into our kids.
Yeah. And this is not, we aren't saying it all like, oh, it all works out in the end. Just have babies and who cares? We are very intentional with each one of our children and trying to be as in tune to them as we can, to see, okay, are they feeling neglected? But that can happen at any time. That can happen whether there's a new baby or there's not a new baby. And so a new baby is a great time to evaluate, like, where's everybody at? Who needs more time with mommy or daddy? But it's just really great to circle around and check on that, whether you have 2 children or, 8 children.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you talked about that. I think you had really great insight into pitfalls of big families. I think it was another episode where it does seem like that can be a common misstep of big families. You're thinking like, oh, they're fine. Like, well, are you sure? Like, what makes you say that? And I think that the level of intentionality and the burden, or I call it a burden, but the responsibility really grows with each child, And so, it is incumbent upon us to set those mindsets into our children to make sure they are being tended to and cared for. And you can't just be like, it's easy to just be like, oh, they're fine. Like they're adaptable, or there's like,
exactly. Yeah. Okay.
How about one more?
One more.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have 2 more, and one of them's quick. Okay, we'll do one more.
No. Let's do 2. Let's do the quick one. We'll see how quick it actually is.
Okay. Well, I don't want to end on the quick one. I think that's my problem. Okay, it was thoughts on Rebecca for homeschooling.
Go for it.
I just feel like it's kind of niche and specific. Okay, but like really quick, I did say Rebecca growing up, and I feel like it's the stereotypical like replication of a public school system. So you'll get your bases covered, but it kind of turns learning into cardboard in my experience. So it's great if you don't have a better option because it can cover the bases. You can make it exciting as the teacher. And I know that there's some seasons of life where as a mom, you just need to make sure that the bases are getting covered.
Yes.
You know, and it's just like, you know what, do the spelling program. Who cares if it's dry as dust? You'll know how to spell at the end, you know? So those are my thoughts on it. If you have another option, I would take that option from my personal choice. I just think there's a lot of great options out there nowadays that weren't when a Becca was supreme.
That makes sense.
You know? Okay. Was that quick enough?
That was great. That was great. We can do one more.
Okay. How to introduce your kids to hell and the fear and wrath of God without scaring them, especially for kids who might then start to just act in fear instead of the love of God. Maybe that's a whole episode, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, holy smokes.
That one's not a short one.
Yeah, can we
do
take
that
a
one?
rain check? Yeah, on that one.
Okay, we'll do a whole podcast episode on that one.
Great.
Does that work?
That's great.
Okay, good.
Okay, folks, thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. If you're listening on audio device, go to whatever platform you're listening on and maybe give us a rating or a review there. That's all I'm going to ask.
All right, we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.